So in 1996 I was looking around the New Forest East constituency in preparation for trying to become an MP, and I went to a churchyard in Fawley in the constituency, near the constituency boundary, and found this remarkable inscription on a headstone in memory of Flight Lieutenant Samuel Marcus Kinkead, DSO, DSC and Bar, DFC and Bar, who'd been killed trying to break the world airspeed record. And I thought, this is remarkable, a young officer to have so many decorations. There must be a tremendous story behind it. And it took about 10 years of research and finding the family and piecing together the story, and eventually a book appeared in 2011 called Racing Ace, which was the story not only of Kinkead's life but of all the campaigns in which he fought, culminating tragically in his fatal attempt to break the world airspeed record and become the first man to beat 5 miles a minute, 300 miles an hour. And it was ironic that someone who had won so many decorations in so many battles against people trying to kill him should have sadly, tragically died in an accident when everybody was willing him on to even greater success. But the area in which he was working, which was the Schneider Trophy seaplanes, led directly to the development of the Spitfire, so he was one of the pioneers whose legacy led to the successful outcome of the Battle of Britain. So another good reason to remember him there.
Sam Kinkead is one of those people who came from the Empire, in its case South Africa, in their hundreds of thousands to join British forces and Commonwealth forces during World War I. He chose to learn to fly and to fight with the Royal Naval Air Service. He kicked off his training at Eastbourne. After qualifying as a pilot, he was sent to Gallipoli, where he scored some of his first victories as a fighter pilot. Then came back to the UK, did a spell of instructing at Redcar, and then went off to the Western Front, where he served for much of the next 18 months or so. He was highly decorated, even though he wasn't one of the absolutely highest scoring fighter pilots, but he helped set a tradition both for the Royal Naval Air Service and for the RAF in leadership, in determination, and probably sheer bloody mindedness, being one of those so-called colonials. He also demonstrated that kind of, what should we call it, commitment, determination, sheer bloody mindedness to be a test pilot, an experimental pilot. I think that showed through in him being selected for the high-speed flight in 1927. He flew in 2 Schneider Trophy competitions, not winning, but was chosen to attempt the world airspeed record in 1928, and that's where he lost his life, trying to fly at high speed over the water in low cloud and mist. Almost certainly there was some political pressure to make him to do that, but his courage, possibly hot-headedness, led him to make that flight despite the fact that it was extremely dangerous so to do. Whatever we say about people like that, they flew right at the edges of aviation knowledge at that time and set standards that have continued in the armed forces and the air forces of the modern day right into the 21st century. Young men always think they're immortal. Sadly, some of them aren't.
I'd like to say a particular thank you to Nina Castle. Nina is my longtime friend and researcher, and Nina was the person who typed the whole book.
Jesus.
Absolutely. So, Nina, thank you for that. Again, so that's the background to this story. And Graham, would you like to take over and just say a few words?
He said few, you noticed.
I did.
Yeah, so stick to it.
Seb and I promised not to have a lot of inter-service rivalry in what we're going to say, and not to go on for very long. But first and foremost, I think Julian must be really reveling in having a bunch of people in a room who are debating Brexit.
Someone had to mention that word.
Okay. That's the last time I'll ever use it today. When Julian asked me to say a few words, I thought, what are we going to do? And I stepped back a long time, because as a young aviation enthusiast and historian, one of the stories you look at is the Schneider Trophy. That, when I was young, was only 30 years in history, and Kink was one of those people who tried very hard at a time when aviation was, let's face it, extremely dangerous, and when test pilots and high-speed pilots were pushing the boundaries. When I then managed to become a professional, if I can ever claim to have been a professional aviation historian, I was astonished and delighted to find that Fleet Air Museum's archives held a number of albums and documents relating to King, which of course we then made available for Julian for the book. And I don't know, it must have been best part of 20 years ago that you first turned up and said, can I have a look at what you've got on Kinkead? And that's where we're still at it 20 years later. But I think it's also important that we remember that not only was he a fighter pilot, a test pilot in that sense, a man who gave his life for the progress and development of aviation, but also he represents one of those many hundreds of thousands of men from the days when we had an empire and a commonwealth who left their home countries, came to the UK, signed up and did their bit. Okay, he stayed, he had, in a sense, a good life, but he contributed to the UK, he contributed to in a sense, taxation, he contributed to the development of aviation and the Royal Air Force. But to close, I would say he is a classic example of those guys who came from places like New Zealand, from Australia, and South Africa to make the Royal Naval Air Service the primary service of aviation in the First World War. And it's absolutely great that we have him here, and that his new medals list on the new plaque begins with the Distinguished Service Cross.
I hate to say this, Graham, but it actually begins with the Distinguished Service Order.
Sorry.
Although the Distinguished Service Cross was indeed the first one that he won. But of course we're not having any inter-service.
Absolutely not, and now it's all turned to Seb.
Thank you, Julian. I just wanted to say, following on from what Graham said, a few words about aviation and what people like Kinkead contributed to it. If you look at the portrait, you see a happy, smiling, cheerful face. If you look at some of the other portraits around the room, they have a sort of well, in some cases they don't smile at all. But the others mostly have a sort of half smile, a sort of portrait, photograph type smile, if they're smiling at all. Whereas Kinkead has a big grin on his face. And I think that epitomises the man. This was a man who lived life to the full. In life and in death, he was living life to the full. And I think it's good to remember just how dangerous aviation was in those days. If you look at two of the other portraits in this room, the two about on either side of Winston Churchill, those two gentlemen were also pioneering spirits in the same spirit as Kinkead, and they too lost their lives. They were flying what was known as the very long-range monoplane, which was a specially designed aircraft. Again, as with the Schneider Trophy aircraft, it was designed to try and break records, push the boundaries of aviation. They were trying to fly non-stop to South Africa. It's a single-engine aircraft. It took off from Cromwell to try and fly all the way down to South Africa. It's home country, of course, country of birth. But the engine failed, as there isn't much romance in flying, particularly in the fact that 737 and EasyJet. There's absolutely no romance to that, I have to say. But in those days, there was an element of romance. They were flying in that spirit, genuinely spirited people. And I think they epitomise a Second World War fighter pilot, sadly also killed in the war. He was a Canadian, again, from British Empire and Commonwealth, who'd come over to fight. He was killed in the UK in a flying accident by Kinkead. But he wrote the famous poem High Flight, which some of you may be familiar with. I think the first line of that epitomises what Kinkead is all about. The first line is, to break the surly bonds of earth. And the poem ends with, if I can remember it precisely, it ends with, oh, I trod the high untrespassed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touched the face of God. And if the face of God looks like anything, perhaps the face of God has that sort of smile. It's God's face. That's all I'd like to say. Thank you very much. Thank you to Julian for everything he has done for Kinkead.
It's been an honour to help revive the memory of Kinkead, and of course the family themselves, and I'm hoping that we might have a few words before Paul does the formal unveiling from perhaps members of the family, some 1 or 2 words, because I know that they have been looking into such archives and items that were left behind. But perhaps somebody would like to say something about what it's meant to them to find out so much more about their famous scientists.
I'm a failed pilot. I desperately wanted to try. And in the family, it may be my memory that we didn't really talk about kink as much as perhaps we should have done. So it was much later into when I was in the air training corps and hoping to sort of make a career that way. And I found out that I had this famous relative, and that was the reason why I had the silly surname that I had that everyone couldn't spell, and we always had problems wherever we went with. And at that time, I actually tried to do some research myself, but as a sort of 16-year-old, 15-year-old, it was much harder to get the sources. So I'm very happy to thank Julian for doing all the hard work for us and opening doors that might not otherwise have been opened for us, and letting us know so much more. And we hope to keep encouraging him for the future, because I'm sure it's been very interesting to me watching the amount of extra information that's coming out now as people look back at the sort of 100-year anniversaries. And you see people who would never be interested in their relatives starting to talk about their relatives and finding out extra things. We've just had that ourselves with doors that may be open. So there may be a lot more untold story that we have for that. The other thing that was, I must say, question to Julian about it was quite interesting to me to actually hear my father talking about the other brother, Tos, who fought in South Africa before he tried to be a pilot and unfortunately was killed in training, as so many people were. And that's quite interesting hearing my dad's and seeing his interest, because that was his uncle. And somehow when I hear great uncle, it seems so far away, but it's quite interesting to realise how close it is. And to me, it's slightly ironic to see now he's facing Churchill, who would be responsible for sending him to the Dardanelles, where he had the chance to learn his trade before actually ending up on the Western Front and all the difficulties there. But thank you so much, Julian, for your efforts. It's been very rewarding for the family. We now actually have this big tome that we can bring to the nation. It shows all the information we need to know. So thank you very much.
Side of the family that actually remained in South Africa, because my father was in the South African Navy. So we were being military our whole lives and always knew about Great Uncle Kinkead was a famous pilot, definitely. And we were, part of our family was his sister, Aunt Nora. So we always had Aunt Nora as part of our family. And one thing a family that we always remember was the phone call from Julian to South Africa. The phone rang, my sister answered, and apparently Julian had said to my sister, is looking for the family of Kinkead. Are we any relation? And she said, oh yes, that's our great uncle, but actually there's 2 other brothers who are actually in the UK already. So he hadn't realised that just down the road was Mark and Uncle Bob. Uncle Mark and Uncle Bob. My brother's too young, my father's too young for us. So that's how we got connected. My mother has recently passed away, and going through all her cupboards and big chests and things, discovered a few little odds and ends of that she had kept. Obviously must have come via Aunt Nora, and she had kept them all, which I've shown you in a few little odds and ends and little memorabilia of Kink. So he certainly carries on in our household. And thank you so much for all your research and bringing them back to life.
Thank you very much, yes.
I just want to end up by saying Tim has already thanked Julian for illuminating and educating my side of the family about our own relative, and keeping that alive over the last 20 years, which we're very, very grateful for, and look forward to more of the same to come. But in this particular room, I think we must make sure we thank Tony as well, because I am absolutely sure that Kink is the sort of man that after a beer or 2 wouldn't have hesitated to leap into action if he saw was that sort of error. And I think we have a kindred spirit in the room, and our thanks very much for that as well.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And Tony, I know you've suffered a very recent close family loss, and it is all the more appreciated that you've nevertheless gone through with the arrangements for today, which is really something extra special. So a special round of applause for today. And of course, one of Kink's many claims to fame was the fact that the aircraft in which he lost his life was a direct predecessor of the Spitfire. And amongst the material that I've just been shown from South Africa today is this letter to Helen Kinkead, Kink's mother, dated March the 23rd, 1928. So that's 11 days after the fatal accident. And it says, Dear Mrs. Kinkead, it was with great regret that I witnessed the terrible accident which happened to your son when trying to win for Britain the highest speed record, and I wish to offer you my deepest sympathy in your sad loss. Kink was very much loved by all who knew him, and leaves behind a record marked with courage and bravery that will ever stand out as an example to all who may follow him. Once again, offering my deepest sympathy and regrets in this your sad bereavement. Sincerely yours, R.J. Mitchell, designer of the Spitfire. So with that, Paul, will you do the honours, please?
Certainly will.
Thank you, and that concludes the formalities. I know we're not up against a hard stop, so we can resume our chat.